It is evening. The cold winter night approaches. The year is 1170, the place Canterbury Cathedral. Archbishop Thomas Becket prepares to meet 4 knights in the service of King Henry II. They'd overheard His Majesty wishing Becket dead. His Majesty's will be done.
They came eager to win the king's favor, but now they stood as if confused. One of the knights struck my Lord Becket with the flat of his sword, saying, "Fly, you are a dead man." And he could have escaped, through the crypt or up into the roof chambers. They tried to drag him from the church, but we held him back. Brother Edward, putting his arm up, was slashed, and by that same stroke, Archbishop Becket was wounded in the head. And as he knelt there, clasping and stretching his hands out to God, a second stroke was dealt him, a blow of such force that the sword was broken against his head. He took 4 blows in all.
God rules us all. No one in the medieval world doubted that. But on earth, who should rule on earth? The king or the church? Thomas Becket had made his choice, and for putting his church before his king, he was murdered. But what made the church in medieval England so powerful that it could challenge kings? St. Mary's, Kilpeck in Herefordshire, a 12th century parish church. There was a church in almost every village in medieval England. So many survive today because most weren't built in wood and thatch, but in stone. It shows their importance. The church was the center of village life.
Churches are used for dancing, and people come to church to drink ale. Yes, and the churchyards are used for fairs and markets, and there's wrestling and summer sport and much music.
But the church was more than a place where people could meet and be together. It taught how people should behave. It laid down rules, what was good, what was bad. And on Sundays and feast days and services across the country, the message was drummed home.
Do not fall into sin. Be not proud, lazy, drunken. Do not keep a bad house. Come to church, that the church can bless your children and make your marriage legal. Come to church to confess your sins. Come to church to celebrate the Christian faith respectfully and in the proper manner.
I am a poor old woman who knows nothing. I never could read. But in my parish church I see heaven painted with harps and lutes, and hell where the damned are boiled. Hell frightens me, but heaven brings joy.
Heaven was God's home, a place of light and rest. It was here, according to the church, that people who'd followed the church's rules when alive were rewarded after death. Those that broke the rules were punished in hell.
There is a weeping and a gnashing of teeth. There are devils that bind ye hand and foot, and tortures that last forever.
My feet turned toad-like, for in life I'd stood in sin. My breast was eaten up with worms, my stomach devoured by snakes, for I had loved evil and rotten things more than I had loved God. My lips were cut off, my nose was cut off, my eyes hung down upon my cheeks.
Was it the fear of hell that gave the church its power? Perhaps for believers. But there were many for whom hell didn't seem to make much difference.
It's a problem. My bishop has mentioned it often. How strangely unmoved people seem by the hellfire that awaits them. They'll chatter in the church, and when I ask them why, they'll say, "The priest speaks in Latin. The service is all in Latin. We do not understand." And when I ask them, are they believers, some will say, "Oh, yes." But then I find they believe such absurd things, not the true gospel at all, but the old superstitions. That you must lay an extra plate for the fairies? Or that you should place sick children on the roof of the house to cure them? Or that you can work witchcraft on the corpse of a dead man? And in the face of such nonsense, mere laughter in the church seems trifling.
The job of enforcing the church's teachings fell on the priests. So were they failing in their duty?
The vicar never wears his robe. Ask him where it is. He'll say he lost it gambling.
Vicars aren't meant to marry, but Arn lives with a woman and frolics openly through the meadow. And he was away for 6 weeks and had no one stand in for him.
The vicar spends his life in the alehouse, gossiping and getting drunk.
There was a problem with the quality of local priests. Many joined not because they were religious, but because a priest's life was comfortable, paid for at the locals' expense. But they weren't all bad.
I know a goodly priest, always giving to the poor, not just money raised in church, but his own money, sure. And though his parish is wide, come hell or high water, he's out there visiting like a good priest oughter, until by spotless living and through simple good behaviour, he draws his parish with him unto heaven and our Saviour.
Priests involved themselves at every level of village life, drawing up charters, overseeing wills, ministering to the sick. Their presence gave the national church a representative in every parish in the country. But that was only one half of the church's power. These are the ruins of Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire. Fountains was one of 750 religious communities in 12th century England. These monasteries controlled 15% of the land. And all for men and women to come and dedicate their lives to God.
We must live without furs, linen, shirts, combs, mattresses. We must, of course, have farms and meadows to grow food. Otherwise we couldn't entertain guests. And one must be hospitable. But let us not grow rich. No. As Jesus Christ was poor, so we will be poor, and give up the riches of the world.
What made someone become a monk or a nun? The only surviving life story of a nun in the 12th century is that of Christina of Markyate.
I was 13 and my parents had taken me to the monastery of St. Alban. His bones were kept there. You could pray to them and ask his blessing. And I remember how the monks seemed so perfect, so content. I wanted to join them. And as I left, I scratched the sign of a cross in a door with my fingernail, that I should return there one day and take my vows. I'd lost all interest in the world. I wanted to be pure.
Women joined the nunneries for many different reasons. They could prove themselves there. They could study. If they reached the rank of abbess or prioress, they could experience real power denied them in so many other walks of life. For some, the nunneries were simply an escape.
My parents were preparing my wedding. I said, I don't want to get married. They just laughed. They tried to tempt me, wouldn't let me go to church, took me to banquets to get me drunk, hoping at last I'd take the pleasures of the world. But I was obstinate. And then they locked me in my bridal chamber, and they'd found this husband for me, and they egged him on. Call yourself a man, go on, you can talk her round. And he came into the room, and I was hiding behind a tapestry. After he left, I climbed out the window. It was as if I had escaped some devil with blackened teeth that made to seize me.
The priory that Christina founded at Markyate was small in comparison to Fountains. At its height, there were 200 monks here, and life in their separate world was Christian worship at its most perfect.
The first thing that strikes you is how quiet it is. Shh, vow of silence. The second thing, the white of their habits. Dyes are a luxury, so they wear cloth of undyed sheep's wool. They count honours and riches as dung. They're an example to us all, like the fist of God battering in our faces. Good food means nothing. Strong drink won't touch it. Pleasures of the flesh. Whew. Women aren't even allowed past their gates. No women, no hawks, no dogs.
Daily routine followed a strict timetable of work, prayer, and study. 8 times a day, the monks were called into the abbey church to hear the Mass or to sing psalms in praise of the Lord.
The first service is 2 in the morning. What a sorry sight. They're all fighting to stay awake, hoping no one will notice if they slump back and rest a while, catch 40 winks.
Beyond the abbey church lay the hospital, the kitchens, the workshops. For 5 hours a day, the monks labored at household chores, or in the fields, or in the scriptorium, where in the days before the printing press, monks would write books by hand. The monasteries became great centers of learning, and the manuscripts the monks produced remain amongst the highest achievements of medieval art.
You only need 3 fingers to write, but your whole body's working. Anyone who says it's easy's never tried it. And in midwinter, when you're numb with cold...
Once every day, the monks would gather in the chapter house. Here would be read out the rules of the order, a chapter a day, and lapses in discipline would be dealt with.
One of the younger brothers gives the punishment, a strong arm to swing the cane.
Who decided who should be punished? The abbot. These abbots were men of great power. They looked after the spiritual health of the community, but, just as important, it was they that had responsibility for the monastery's business interests, its farms, estates, forests, breweries. At Fountains, the abbot ran a staff of over 400, farm workers, butlers, launderers. And the abbot also had to look after the many pilgrims who came to be blessed or to cadge a free meal in the refectory.
The monks have a duty to welcome travellers, and they serve a better meal than they eat themselves. They make do on bread, cabbage, beans. Meat's only allowed in the hospital when the brothers are sick.
The pilgrims that visited the monasteries ensured that the monks in their separate world never quite lost touch with life beyond the monastery walls. They brought the gossip that found its way into the monastic chronicles, and they also brought money, gifts of gold, or other more humble offerings that the monks piled high in the monastery cellars. But with such endless comings and goings, could the monks preserve the simplicity their order had once known? Not always. As money flooded in from pilgrims and land rents, vows of poverty were often forgotten. Monks and nuns became corrupted by their enormous wealth.
I visited the convent of St. Armand and found that the nuns wear undergarments, strictly not allowed. They dye their hair, wear cloaks of rabbit skin, but far worse, on questioning, I found the sub-prioress to be sleeping with Thomas the carter, and Sister Jacqueline's left the nunnery pregnant as a result of her relations with one of the chaplains.
Monks these days lead lazy, comfortable lives. They have no pity for the poor. They own such large estates they think of themselves only as landlords, riding around from manor to manor with a pack of dogs at their heels.
Monks, for their comfort, depend on the labour of others. They take money from pilgrims, lap up gifts of land or gold. They live in the cloister, but their riches mark them out as men of the world.
The growing influence of the monasteries had won them many enemies. Even the king, Henry II, was aware of the problem.
I remember once the monks at St. Swithin's in Winchester grovelling in the dust before King Henry, for it seemed their abbot had cut 3 of their daily dishes. Well, the king asked them how many were they used to. 13, they said. 13, cried the king, outraged. I and my court are content with 5. Damn and blast your abbot, therefore, if he doesn't cut your dishes to match the number in my court.
Why was Henry so angry? Because the church rivaled his authority and was out of his control. The head of this enormous organization wasn't the king, but the Pope in Rome. And the church considered itself separate. It had its own prisons, its own courts. Members of the church were above the law.
Let it be heard that the prisoner, William de Worde, killed William Lavington in a fight outside Salisbury Cathedral last Michaelmas. But this same William de Worde pleads he is a clergyman, and so this same William de Worde will be handed over to the church authorities to be tried in the bishop's court.
King Henry knew of 200 cases where murderers had hid behind the special privilege of the church and so escaped his justice. He found the situation intolerable, but his Archbishop, Thomas Becket, refused to compromise.
We clergy have Christ alone as our king, and so being under the power of no earthly ruler, we should be judged by our own law.
And that wasn't all. Becket even dared goad the king further.
You princes, you think we bishops should bow down before you? Compared to the church, your power is as nothing. I will not obey you. In fact, I think you should bow down before me.
Until at last the king lost his temper, and 4 ignorant knights took it upon themselves to rid him of his burden. Becket was to die.
He falls by the altar. As he lies there, one knight strikes him a blow of such force that the sword was broken against his head. He took 4 blows in all. The whole of the crown of his head was lopped off. But he didn't try to avoid or parry the blows. He accepted death from a desire to be with God. Then one of the knights, Hugh of Horsey, extracted the blood and brains from the hollow of his skull with the point of his sword.
What did Becket's death achieve? Public opinion swung against Henry. Europe was outraged. And the king was forced to do penance, kneeling, dressed in sackcloth, to be whipped by one of Becket's monks. The church never let Becket's name die. He was made a saint, and miracles were said to take place at his tomb. So what was the power of the church in medieval England?
If you'd like the History File Medieval Realms Programme Guide, then please telephone BBC Education Information on 081 746 1111.